my name is Injun Moon and welcome to iHome Church. And for those of you joining us for the first time, don't forget to subscribe to our email list. Today I would like to talk about the magic of true love. And I have a little story to share with all of you. I have a dear friend that I've known for many years. And whenever we talk about love and whenever we talk about relationship, he goes into this headache mode, or what I call the monk scream. And he is absolutely terrified of the number 2. And he used to tell me that, for me, relationships kind of feels like 1 and 1 equals 2. And the number 2, for some reason, just terrifies me. And I said, why is it? And he says, well, the number 2 kind of looks like a beautiful, graceful swan. But if you put a little beak in front of that 2, the starting point, it can look like a beautiful swan with a terribly sharp beak. And he says, I'm terrified of deep or meaningful relationships because I grew up in a family where my father was mercilessly handpicked by my mother. And I just don't want to find myself in that situation or in that quandary ever. So I would much rather do away with any deep, meaningful relationships and do what I need to get by. But it just absolutely terrifies me. And so when I heard him say these words to me, it got me thinking. And yes, he is absolutely right when you're talking about relationship. 1 and 1 equals 2, and that 2 people come together because we're somehow put together or bound together, working together. And I think many times we kind of look at 1 and 1 equals 2 as a very simplistic mathematical equation. But more important than the number, I think, is the word and. It's 1 and 1 that equals 2. And that's where the magic of relationships or magic of true love comes into play. And that helps makes the number 2, these 2 people coming together, a wonderful relationship that could be likened to being in heaven, or an extremely difficult relationship that can be likened to being in hell. And Rumi has a wonderful quote. Rumi, of course, is the Persian mystic. And he used to say that whenever we can manage to love without expectation, without calculation, and without negotiation, then we are in heaven. And I think he is absolutely right and hits home in many respects, because relationships are made difficult because we do have and we do tend to put a lot of expectations on the relationships or on the other person. And sometimes when we're engaged in relationships, all we're doing is thinking about, well, creating lists. My list is this, his list is that. Who owes more, or whose turn is it to give, or whose turn is it to receive? And it gets really burdensome. Or many times we are constantly negotiating with each other. Like, okay, you do this for me, then I do this for you. If you make me feel good, then I will love you. And it's all of these conditions that makes relationships incredibly difficult and complicated and fraught with misunderstanding on both sides. And so when my father, the Reverend Sam Young Moon, teaches that in order to have a wonderful relationship with somebody, be it a parent or a child or a spouse or siblings, my father has always encouraged us to live for the sake of others, practicing true love. And so when he says, live for the sake of others, I think for many years, many people have kind of understood that as total self-annihilation for the other. total self-denial, but we gotta be living in order to live for the sake of others. But I think a better way to understand what he means by that is that living for the sake of others, practicing true love, implies that it's something that needs to be learned. It's something that needs to be practiced. It's something that we need to kind of work on to go about being this true love individual, or men and women that we would all like to be. And when we are truly living for the sake of others, the way I like to understand it is that we live for the sake of others when we learn to care about the other person's happiness just because. Meaning, we wish the other person all the happiness and all the love and all the well wishes, not because we're expecting anything in return, not because we're calculating where do we stand vis-a-vis the other person in terms of our list, not because we're in the middle of this fantastic negotiation that the other side, might be slightly ahead, and now it's my turn to be ahead, and almost as if looking at a relationship as a trade or a bargain of some sort, instead of thinking about it in that way. When you live for the sake of others, and when you genuinely wish upon somebody, and you more than wish, actually learn to care about the other person's happiness, just because, without any strings attached, that's when you are in a prime situation to practice this thing called true love. And Reverend Moon, my father, defines true love in this way. He says there are qualities of true love, and there are 4 qualities. He says that true love is absolute. It is eternal. It is unique and unchanging. And so if we are to ask the help from Merriam-Webster's dictionary, and we look up these words, we realize that the word absolute means free from imperfection or mixture. In other words, in order to be that person of true love, we gotta be, quote, perfectly us. You gotta be perfectly you, genuine, honest, transparent, in order to be that person who wants to practice true love, living for the sake of others. But a second definition of the word absolute means free from control, restriction, or qualification. And qualification means limitation or modification. In other words, I love you, now just change and do all these things that I expect you to do. But if we are truly an absolute person practicing true love, what we are doing is not busy controlling, modifying, limiting, or restricting the other person. But we are free in terms of our ability to love, because we want the other person to love us freely, just as we want to love the other person freely. In other words, it's a very natural relationship. Now, when we look at the second quality, the eternal quality in true love, the word eternal means everlasting and perpetual. And it is everlasting when we practice these qualities of true love, because it is freely received and freely given. In other words, it's eternal and not temporal. We're not stuck on the superficialities of this imperfect world that we live in. What we are concentrating on is that eternal beauty of the other person, the ability to just truly love, kind of like the way a parent loves a child. It doesn't matter, what happens in our life. The minute the child is placed in our hands, that child is eternally our loved one, our beloved. And we love this child regardless of what happens in the course of one's life. It's the kind of a parental love. And the interesting thing about this love is that when it is eternal and it is freely given and freely received, it is not exhausting. When the love is not eternal and it's temporal or the superficial kind of love, it takes a great deal of effort to keep it going. It is extremely exhausting and it just takes so much wind out of you. But when love is freely given and received, it creates its own energy that perpetuates the dynamic of what you have with the other person. And this third quality that my father talks about is the word unique. The word unique means one of a kind or very unusual. True love is indeed very unusual in this imperfect or in this temporal world. It's kind of like finding a diamond in the rough, because true love is uniquely unselfish. When we wish upon the other infinite happiness, what we are doing is concentrating on what we can be responsible for, not overly taxing ourselves, trying to control the other person, trying to restrict or modify the other person to our liking, but really always thinking about, what can we do to help make this person a happier person? And in that way, we can enjoy this incredibly one-of-a-kind, beautiful, very unusual, unpredictable kind of love that is ever exciting and that is ever compelling to the two people involved, the one and one. And the fourth quality is unchanging. And again, this quality is very much a parental kind of a love, in that unchanging means unalterable. It cannot be substituted. In other words, it is a quality that kind of implies that love is not based on certain conditions. Conditions can change all the time. You and I can have a beautiful relationship with our sibling or our parent, but then the condition changed, something happens. And does that mean that because the condition changed, and you're not loving me the way I want you to love me, I love you less? No. True love is not like that. True love is unchanging in that it is unconditional. It is not what you do for me that determines how much I'm going to love you. I am going to love you with an unchanging heart, with an eternal heart, with a unique heart, and with an absolute heart. And that's the beauty of what true love is all about. And when I think about, how do we kind of understand, or what would be a great example of these four qualities? It reminds me of the story by Hans Christian Andersen. And the story is called The Old Man is Always Right. And it's a story about this farmer, a very poor farmer, who lives on this farm and has a small cottage that he shares with his wife. And one day he decides to go to market with the only valuable asset that he has, which is a horse. And on the way to the market, he meets up with a series of different characters, and he ends up trading. And for instance, he first meets up with this guy who has this fabulous cow, and he's thinking, oh, well, my horse is much more worth more valuable than that cow, but that cow can give great delicious milk for my wife, so I should trade it in for a cow. And he does so. But then he goes a little bit more, and then he realizes that, oh, there's a sheep, and that sheep can give a wool and keep my wife very, very happy and warm in the wintertime. So I'm going to trade my cow in for a sheep. And then he goes a little bit more further down the road to market, and he sees another person with a goose. And he says, oh, that goose is something that my wife had wanted. It would be perfect for Christmas. So I'm going to trade my sheep for a goose. And he goes a little bit further and decides to comes upon this man with a hen, and decides that, oh, I am going to trade in my goose for a hen, because then my wife can have fresh eggs. And so he takes the hen, goes a little further, and finds somebody with a basket of rotten apples, and he says, oh, basket of rotten apples for my pig, something that I didn't have before. So he trades in his hen for a basket of rotten apples. And he finally makes his way into the tavern. And in the tavern, there are all sorts of characters. And, you know, this English gentleman who is very, very rich with coins coming out of his pockets. He looks at the man, and he's heard about the foolishness of this farmer's trading on the way to the market. And he kind of says to the farmer, I said, you know, I would love to go back home with you to the farm and see what your wife says. And I bet you that your wife is going to smack you for all this foolishness that you did along the way to the market. But then the farmer turns to this Englishman and says, well, I would wager your bushel of finery of gold coins, because I know that my wife, when she sees me with this basket of rotten apples, she will kiss me and she will welcome me home, and with open arms. And so in disbelief, the Englishman decides to follow the farmer back. And so the farmer and the Englishman decides to tell the wife, you know, how they got to hold this basket of rotten apples that they brought back home. And each story that the husband says or tells the wife about trading the horse for a cow, she says, oh, my wonderful wise husband, you were thinking about bringing me fresh milk. You know, how wonderful this is. Then the husband says, well, my dear, the cow was traded in for a sheep. And she says, oh, my dear, you thought about, you know, goat cheese and all the woolen mittens that we could knit for each other. How wonderful you are. And then the husband says, well, dear, you know, I didn't stop with the sheep, but, you know, I traded the sheep in for a goose. And the wife exclaimed, oh, my wonderful wise husband, how did you know that I was hoping for a lovely goose for Christmas? You are absolutely fantastic. And, you know, of course, sitting next to the farmer, the English gentleman's jaw is dropping to the floor, and probably hit it a couple of times because just cannot believe what he's hearing with his ears. And the husband goes on, and, you know, but it's not the goose I traded in for a hen. And she said, oh, you thought about how I love fresh eggs in the morning, and how I wanted to have chickens and a chicken pen in the back of our cottage. How wonderful you are. And then the husband says, and I traded in the chicken for a basket of rotten apples, because, you know, our mom told us that we should always keep a apple on the counter because it's a symbol of prosperity. And the last one was so old, it blew up in everybody's face. But now we have a whole basket full. And then the wife just ran up to the husband, grabbed the husband's face and said, how funny you are. And how thoughtful you are. I love you so much. And she gave him the warmest and the biggest kiss ever. And so in the end of the day, the storyteller says, the incredible thing about this couple is that they're always going downhill in terms of the way the world might perceive what these foolish peasants are doing. What the peasant or the farmer did in trading his horse for a cow, and then for a sheep, and then a goose and a hen, and then a basket of rotten apples is absolute foolishness. But he did it out of the lovingness of his heart, without, expecting anything without calculating or thinking, okay, well, I'm going to get this for my wife and she's going to get that for me. He just wanted to make her happy. He was sincerely caring about his wife's happiness. Not because he wanted to receive all of these wonderful things from her, but just because he loved her. And the wife, is thinking that the husband that she has is the greatest thing on earth. And he can do no wrong. And even though the world may look at this couple as totally a foolish couple, the fact is that even though they're always going downhill by world standard, they're always happy. And so when you are constantly always living for the sake of others, wishing other people's happiness, you're kind of creating a vacuum because you're giving of yourself, which allows the universe to swish in and bring forth or bring into that space incredible blessing, incredible abundance, and incredible love. So this story, in a nutshell, is a story about the magic of true love. In that what may seem foolish, and I think many times a religious life does look quite foolish to the world, because we are thinking about the other more than ourselves. But when we do that, then we inspire the universe. We conspire, the universe comes and brings us all this blessing and all this abundance. And so this story is a wonderful tale of how, it's not what you have, it's not how foolish you might appear to somebody. But as long as you are honest and natural and genuinely grateful for the life and for every opportunity that are put in front of you, then because we are approaching life with a grateful disposition, all these magical things can happen. And I know that for once that my father's, this is kind of like his philosophy on life. He's never owned anything in his name. Everybody thinks he's one of the richest people on the planet. But the fact is, he never owned anything in his name. Everything was owned by the people, by the church, by the board. Everybody thinks he left, fortunes for his children. He did not. He left nothing. But what he gave to us is this gift of an understanding of true love and the value of the importance of living for the sake of others, because that's where all magic happens. And even if the world takes everything away from you, as long as we can have a grateful heart, as long as we can have a loving disposition, and better than that, better than a loving disposition, actually learning and practicing how to care about the other person's happiness, just because, with no strings attached, great and wonderful things will happen to your life, will happen to my life, will happen to our life. So just as Rumi said, whenever we can manage, meaning, it does take a little work to love without expectation, without calculation, without tallying points, and without negotiation, which is extremely exhausting and tiring, then we can have heaven, or then we can experience kingdom of heaven in our relationships. So when we look at the simple mathematical equation again, 1 and 1 equals 2. Again, the magic is in the word "and," because that's where the homework needs to be done. That's where true rubbing takes place. And as long as we continue to practice with a loving heart, reminding ourselves how life best lived is a life living for the sake of others, meaning that we can wish happiness for the other person, then we can learn how to love without measuring different conditions that are placed in front of us. So instead of looking at our husband or wife saying, well, today I love you because certain conditions have been met, but tonight I cannot love you, or I love you less because you didn't do A, B, C, and D. Or we may look at our parents and say, you know, you just don't live up to my expectations. You should be more this. You should be more that. And here we go, controlling, restricting, limiting, qualifying our parents again. Parents will take care of themselves, but what we need to do is do what we need to do. And that is, you know, letting the other freely love, and when love is given, freely receive without expecting anything in return. And the same thing with our siblings. How many times do we look at our siblings and say, well, you know, I will only help you, or I will only love you because you helped me. What about just helping, just because? Or if a sibling says to us, well, you know, I'm really angry at you because you didn't live up to certain expectations that I had, and therefore I will love you less because I am disappointed in you. Many times we use the word disappointment because we feel dissed by the appointment that we had with each other, a certain kind of understanding. But if we realize that disappointments really come from a sense of emptiness and fear that we have in, you know, being so frustrated and confused about, well, what am I not going to get from you? Or what are you not doing to me? You know, then our lives are going to be a very burdensome and an exhausting life. But when we can just kind of let it go and let things be, and wish the person well, wish the person happiness, and do what we can in terms of supporting, loving, and empowering the other person. And if the other person wanting a genuine and a true relationship, a true love relationship, realizes that in order to have that, they have to work on the word and also reciprocate with a loving and a genuine and a natural kind of a love, then we realize that we can build incredible relationships in our families, between our spouse, and between our children, and between our parents. And then the world becomes a beautiful place, because we're not waiting for expectation, calculation, and negotiation, just as Rumi says. So I wish all of you a wonderful Sunday and a beautiful week. And let's try to really learn how to care about the other person's happiness just because we love them, and just because we want the best for them. And watch the magic of true love take place in your life and in our lives. So God bless, take care.
There's no one there to dry your tears. I could hold you for a million years to make you feel my love. I know you haven't made your make you feel my love.
If you have any questions and comments, please leave them below the video or go to enginemoon.com and use the contact form. And don't forget to subscribe to our email list. In that way we can update you on all the happenings at our home church. Take care. Bye-bye.